was fascinating. Okay, next up, countering hybrid and transnational threats in the Americas. Building integrated resilience through intelligence, partnership, and adaptation. We have the Honorable Abraham Lugo, Advisor on Transnational Crime, Border Security, and Anti-Corruption, Puerto Rico. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. To me, it's an honor to be here today on this Interparliamentary Forum for Security and Intelligence. My name is Abraham Lugo. I'm going to start talking about my experience in El Salvador. I want to start with this. I've been working for the Department of Homeland Security for quite a while, and most recently, I was an advisor for Department of State here in El Salvador and also in Ecuador. I started my career with the Border Patrol. Before that, I was a Marine, and most of my career with Homeland Security and with the Department of Justice was overseas. So I spent almost 17 years overseas, and if you talk to anybody from Homeland Security, they will tell you that that's not the norm. I started with the Department of Justice, working in the Dominican Republic, working with the police, in which I helped them develop the Unidad Anticontrabando of the Dominican Republic. After that, they sent me to Mexico. Initially, I thought I was going to go to Mexico City, but they sent me to Baja California, Norte, Sur, Sonora, and Sinaloa, where I work with the police against drug trafficking structures. After that, I came to El Salvador, and that was the second time I came here to El Salvador. I came here, the first time I came here was to provide training. The second time I came here as I was the first Homeland Security attaché here in El Salvador. I spent 7 years right here in El Salvador. After El Salvador, I went to South Africa, where I became the regional attaché for Homeland Security. I was the attaché directing Homeland Security projects in the sub-Saharan countries. We have 32 countries. I retired from Homeland Security, and then I came back to El Salvador as a transnational crimes advisor, where I developed with the government of El Salvador is a intelligence center known as the Grupo Conjunto de Inteligencia Fronteriza. Basically, this center, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But this center, at some point, we have 10 participating countries exchanging intelligence in real time. My last post was in Ecuador, where working with the government of Ecuador, we developed the national strategy for borders. The ministers of armed forces, police, customs, and migration signed that strategy, and right now it's on the implementation phase. I want to switch to Spanish.
About a story and my experience in El Salvador. As I said, in El Salvador, I was first as an instructor, and then I came as an attaché, and I came back here, and I've been able to see the huge change. When I came to El Salvador for the first time, the gang problem was starting, and they didn't give the necessary importance to that problem. At that moment, what we say was that, okay, there were groups coming from Los Angeles. They didn't pay attention at that time because they thought that was just a group of young men. But when I came back, gangs had total control. Yesterday we heard that there were many difficult areas. in my experience is that you couldn't go to certain places in El Salvador. You were safe just in certain places, but you couldn't go to most of the places here in the country. And while working in security my whole life, I never thought that El Salvador could have changed so fast in 2 years in such a dramatic way. But we needed a person with vision, a brave person that make difficult choices. President Bukele made those difficult choices, and now we see how El Salvador transformed from an insecure country to one of the most secure countries in the Americas and around the world. In contrast, my last post was in Ecuador.
The border strategy and in Ecuador before pandemic was considered as the safest country in the world, at least one of the safest, at least the safest country in the Americas. In that period, that 2-year period between the pandemic, Ecuador began to see criminal structures entering Ecuador. So, Ecuador is nestled between Colombia and Peru, which are two great cocaine producers, and so there's a corridor that comes from both nations into a place called Duran, and Duran is from Duran out to the Guayaquil port, which obviously is a point of interest. And so during the pandemic, the Balcanes cartel, Jalisco Nueva Generación, Sinaloa cartel all came into Ecuador during the pandemic, and they started to take advantage of I guess the lack of preparation from previous administrations. So there were several critical areas along the borders that were not, cared for. And so Duran is a very industrial, very prosperous area, but due to administrative policies, all of that structure began to be removed, and no option was given to the people in Duran. So these cartels came in, offering new opportunities and job opportunities, obviously from a criminal standpoint, but jobs nevertheless, and setting up like their power in areas where, or their control in areas where the government unfortunately wasn't present. I have to say the current president is making very hard decisions, and we hope that Ecuador is able to move forward and find its way back. Why am I sharing this? Because security isn't like a static thing. Security can crumble down and it can be built back up. It could be fragmented or it could be integrated. So it's really up to us to pay attention to all these indicators and to make sure that, something has always been done. Just because El Salvador is completely safe now doesn't mean that, it's going to be like so forever. This is a live animal, so to speak. One of the things that I want to emphasize one of the things that I wish to point out is that just recently we have heard about the hybrid threats. What are hybrid threats? Well, hybrid threats have always been with us, but more recently so due to political situations, mainly weaker countries, we're starting to hear more about the hybrid threats. In the past, we fought against drug cartels, these cartels that are found between Mexico and the United States always we have all these criminal activities for trafficking and smuggling. Always had collaborating countries that lent their support. Okay, so basically there were donations being made, but nothing like for a specific country, but it didn't matter what's happening on the other side of the border. And these transnational criminal structures, there's always some collaboration and maybe some information exchanges, but it wasn't very efficient, the way things are being done. One of the characteristics that transnational criminal organizations have is that they adapt. And they have a great communication amongst themselves. If we ask a police officer now in any country and we say, so do you have a counterpart or, I'm sorry, no. Do you suspect somebody from being a member of a transnational organization? How do you find out about this person? Majority of cases, they won't know. And many times I've had to deal with officers who are doing a procedure, they're running an investigation, and they need certain information and they don't know where to get it. They don't know where to head to get it. And that is a big issue. You know, we always have Interpol, of course, but these are all mechanisms that take their time. I'm going to speak a little later about some of the programs that we implemented here in Ecuador called the Border Task Force, Joint Border Task Force, and we're going to see how that works. And the question is, how can we protect information from these global threats? First and foremost, I think what we need to do is we need to understand as police force, as military, we have to understand these structures and we have to understand how they work. These transnational structures are evolving and they're slowly becoming into hybrid structures. And what are hybrid structures? Oh, no, please come back to the mic. Next slide, please. So hybrid structures practically are transnational criminal structures, and they have, however, different actors. When we investigate a transnational structure, we obviously know that there is a hierarchy in place. You know, a lot of people say, oh, you know, we're going to get money, and we'll just follow the money, and then we'll get to the hybrid structures. But these hybrid structures difference themselves because from the traditional ones, because hybrid structures don't only work based on money. They are after power, you know, political power, territorial power, and I think as far as gangs, we have information, controlling the narrative, and finally, that's becoming more and more relevant.
Can you stop eating and drinking while you are translating?
Excuse me?
Can you stop eating and drinking while you are translating?
Of course, sir. These are weak countries, and they are using the criminal structures that are trying to obtain their criminal goals. And when we see this, we see some of these structures and how they are coming from country to country, and they destabilize countries themselves. And so they could maybe attempt for the population to go against government because government hasn't been effective enough against these structures, and that there hasn't been a political change. And of course, this political change legitimizes itself against other countries, and so international organizations seek financial support and economical support. Hybrid structures, what they seek is to fusion themselves. So hybrid structures seek for influence, control, power, social power, economic power, political power, to be able to influence political processes with information, with disinformation, misinformation, and also transnational criminal structures seek to maximize earnings, and hybrid control to destabilize governments, to destabilize people such as the people of Duran, which is a larger city, and where they have the Balkans, where they create gangs like Lobos, Choneros, Tigrones. These are all Ecuadorian gangs that didn't exist before, and these gangs turn into cartels that began a strong war in the area of Ecuador, particularly in this area, in this corridor that went from the gangs to the ports. Criminal transnational structures are based on hierarchies. And so these are a little bit easier to combat or fight, in the sense that when we identify a structure, we are able to maybe remove the first leaders of the structure, and the structures and weaken themselves. Then hybrid structures have non-conventional weapons like cyber attacks that seek to destabilize government, go into databases from every country. These structures have gone into police databases to try to try to take from databases and try to destabilize police activity. The methods in the transnational criminal structures, the methods are based on corruption, territorial violence, and hybrid structures are a little bit more complex because they operate from several different dimensions simultaneously. We have weak structures, weak governments that support criminal structures, and their purpose is to destabilize and to move through different countries. And if we look specifically at the Tren de Aragua and we look at their activities in different countries, we realize that Tren de Aragua in certain countries are involved in drug trafficking, sometimes they're involved in extortion, sometimes they're involved in criminal activities in general, like hit for hire. If it wasn't a different activity, then they would be involved in a specific crime, like Sinaloa, Generación, and all of these. But all of these structures, what they seek is to go into a place, into the United States, like Colorado, very stable places for the American territory. And all of these structures have been operating, for example, in Colorado. They went into the narrative or social media to try to achieve their objective. Tren de Aragua had money, but they also served as political. They fed into political negotiations to be able to continue their work. The transnational criminal structures focus more on production, on transportation and distribution. We're talking narcotics, we're talking about individuals, we're talking about arms and weapons, and the more hybrid structures that we're dealing with, again, these are multiple stakeholders that seek to achieve different media, like or different channels, like social media or illegitimate governance. In the case of Ecuador, many of these structures actually took advantage over the lack of presence of the actual state in the area of the borders, particularly in Duran. And they overtook the role of the state, initially offering work to people, and then once they had that set up, they did what they need to do, and they proceeded to go ahead and extort people, charge taxes, and what they generally do. One of the examples that I may take from what a different transnational criminal structure is Hezbollah, even though that is actually a terrorist group. Hezbollah has a lot of presence in South America and the Triple Border, where they have activities to collect funds. They have activities for money laundering. Another one may be the Chinese fentanyl networks, where we have, where there may be a possible presence of political actors acting on fentanyl networks, which is a pretty large problem for the region as well as for us in the United States. One of the things that I always discuss is about integration. And some people, some governments, it's not very well received, but honestly, it's if we're going to talk about international criminal structures or hybrid threats, we must come together. We cannot solve regional problems because that just won't happen. It's not effective, and we have to see the three pillars that I always think are essential, which is the legal framework, because that's why we're here today. The framework needs to be strengthened, needs to recover the existence of intelligence in real time. It needs to allow for joint operations. It needs to allow for it needs to be able to integrate everything, every single effort. When we talk about legal framework, we're talking about a constitution as a basis of our countries and the laws. When we construct a political program and we don't have a legal, a strengthened legal framework, anything that we build tumbles down, it falls. And in Ecuador, when I was living there, I was assigned as advisor for border security, and one of the things that I did there, one of the first things that I did was an assessment of the border. One of the things that I realized is that the legal framework did not support the mission that Ecuador had, which was to fight these structures. There was a lot of weakness in these laws, and then there wasn't an actual integration. And Ecuador, there's 4 agencies that oversee security of the borders, which is police, army, immigration, and borders. There wasn't any actual type of collaboration amongst these agencies, though, and even less so amongst borders. So there really wasn't a joint response, or nobody was talking about who was doing what and where and when, and that was an imminent danger. We spoke with our INL directors, and I said, you know what, I just retired from national security. I can retire 10 more times before we can do anything, because there really isn't any coordination. So what I suggested to them was to run a strategy, and working with the police, with immigration, with customs and borders, and we suggested the idea of doing a strategy that would bring together these 4 agencies. And we actually put some of the problems that we had included. In Tulcan, a specific area from Colombia, the United States had actually donated 4 handheld scanners, which are used to be able to identify narcotics in trucks and vehicles, and 4 had been donated to the police. This was done by the United States, and I believe it was the European Union. They donated 4 handheld scanners to the to customs, and so the military had donated 4 handheld scanners, and we're talking about almost 11 handheld scanners that were donated at $45,000 each, donated to different institutions to put them to work in the same place, small city called Tulcan. And so we realized that not only it wasn't the different. It's not only like each country, but it's almost like every single country is not talking to each other either. So at the embassy, what we did was that we created the Border Security Working Group, which was a working group for the borders. And each time we spoke to the government of Ecuador, we carried the same message, either with the military attaché, political section, and we would meet two times a week. After this, what we did is that we created the same committee with the ministries to be able to exchange this information. When I spoke to the ministers, I brought this strategy up, and he said, so listen, there's problems with integrity with this institution or this other institution. And so one of the larger problems that we actually saw on facilitating the exchange of information is actually the perception that each person has problems with integrity, and this is suggested by these structures. These structures are promoting this narrative, and here in El Salvador, we actually experienced that because at some point, gang structures began to generate the idea or promote the idea that they had people, like they had moles in different areas, like for example in the police, and this was a false narrative. Actually, this was a narrative to be able to to them to be able to obtain territorial control and to facilitate their work and to stop the police from reacting. And so in Ecuador, we actually did a strategy that began with the legal framework. It began by reviewing every single law that was out there, and then we continued to go over each of the institutional policies and avoid any collaboration between the different instances from Ecuadorian agencies. And then we started to go over international treaties. International treaties, ordinarily when there's an agreement made, before it's signed, it's always reviewed that it doesn't go against the laws of a country or the Constitution itself. So what we did was that we first established what the legal framework looked like, and then the second aspect of the strategy was the integrity of the officers, because that was one of the reasons why the different institutions didn't want to work with one another, because of that perception that we actually came through with a proposal to be able to attend to this, and this was a proposal that basically was in is under constitutional review at this moment, but that it pacifies the what is being done, or if a criminal act is taking place, or if of corruption goes through a specific position. For example, if an analyst actually does something against a structure, or corruption is proven, then nothing happens. And so this is classified in the sense of security. And then you attach the security checks to this. So level 4, which would be the major polygraph, there may be a general, that's level 1, and then you may have a secretary, a corporal, that is a higher level. So after the officers check, and after we checked on all the officers, actually we went through intelligence, and we started working amongst the 4 institutions, and this was done in real time. And so these levels of security we needed to make make sure that we took a hold of what was going on. So that's when we suggested that we use AI to make sure that we had all of the different classified positions into different levels of security. And so we needed the control levels that needed to happen in each level of security, and for that we used AI. And so that is what we did, and all the different levels that this person needed to have. So I guess clearance. The fourth part is basically where every single country that was collaborating began, and that was trainings, capacity building, outfitting. And the last phase of the strategy was access to actual communities and development. So we're not really experts in this type of program, but I know there is a large amount of programs, development, access to communities. There's a large amount of programs, and what we did was actually start talking to them to bring these programs to critical areas around the border. And these are the 4 components of the actual strategy, and that we were able to establish. And if we can take the next slide, please. When I speak of integration, efforts, capacities, intelligence, but again, integration cannot happen within a single country. This needs to involve other countries which are also pertinent to this. And so one of the biggest concerns, because there's many countries involved, the biggest concern is sovereignty. We set up an intel center, and we actually had 10 countries participating. We had here in El Salvador with access to databases in real time, to exchange databases in real time. What we did is that when we negotiated with the ministers, we searched for every single agreement that existed, agreements against transnational crime signed with the UN, bilateral agreements, every single agreement. And we went up into the ministers and we said, hey, so you already signed this. You're not in compliance, not because you don't want to, but because there weren't any mechanisms, but now the mechanism is here. And that is a joint, the border working group. We had representatives from these 10 countries, and not a single MOU was signed. Everybody was doing the work based on documents that had been signed before. So everything was signed in real time. I'm short on time, and I realized, but at the center, to be able to, the GSIT Center didn't belong to El Salvador. It wasn't led by neither El Salvador nor the United States. It was actually led by every single participating country, and it was a bit of a corporation of sorts, where there was a representative from every country, and there was a board of directors, and every analyst answered to their own chain of commands. And basically, we had a strategy like the one used by private companies, a matrix system, which is an administrative system where when a new project is coming up, they grab somebody from IT, somebody from robotics, somebody from management, budget, and each of these people answer to their own chains of command, but they work as a group to make sure this works. The center was so successful that in its best time, or during its best moment, we actually received 1,500 requirements weekly, and all of those were answered in 24 hours. And if there was an arrest warrant due to theft or whatever, but they didn't belonged to a criminal structure, then we wouldn't answer it. I believe that integration, as I said before, can help solve crises, but we can never solve them on our own. We must all work together, and we must make sure that integration helps us from becoming reactive to proactive. We have to move along with crime. In the GC Center, we identified the Tren de Aragua years before it was actually acknowledged in the United States. So we started seeing Peru, we started seeing, all of these countries reporting this structure, but we knew who they were before. Another one of the more successful projects was a parliamentary forum, and this was before the pandemic. This parliamentary forum, the different countries identified common legislative needs, and we did it in Mexico, in the Mexican palace, with the help of many Central American nations, and the idea was to identify common threats and to try to harmonize laws as best as possible, because this would allow us to share information better, to try to work in joint operations. I know that I'm short on time, and I'm going to leave it here. But any person that has any questions, I'd be more than happy to give you my email and even my phone, and we can discuss it a little more.